What might eggs in a wire basket symbolise? Let's find out. Hey, how's it going, Revision Squad? I'm Liam, aka Mr. Knight, aka DystopiaJunkie, and in this video we're going to look at Imtiaz Dharker's poem Living Space. I assume you've come here for some poetry analysis. Living Space is on page 9 of your WJEC Eduqas Poetry Anthology, and before we get started making notes, you need to make sure that you're fully prepared. Do you have a pen? At least 3 highlighters? What about some extra paper, just in case you run out of space to make notes? This video will follow the same structure as the others in this series. If this is the first video of mine that you're seeing, then please do follow the link in the top right corner of the screen about now. It'll take you to my entire WJEC Eduqas Poetry Anthology playlist, which eventually will cover the entire anthology. So in this video I will read the poem, I'll go through its context, and I'll provide a close reading. Additionally, I'll consider the poem's meaning, mood, and the poet's motivation. I'll think about themes, and then finally, at the end of the video, there will be an optional revision task for you to complete, because I'm super nice like that. If this video does help you with your GCSE revision, then please do consider dropping it a like and subscribing to my channel, DystopiaJunkie. That way, all upcoming revision content will end up in your subscription feed. Turn on that notification bell and you'll even receive a notification whenever I drop a new video. Right, so generic cringy YouTuber self-promotion stuff aside, here is the poem. Make sure you follow along either on screen or on your anthology. Living space. There are just not enough straight lines. That is the problem. Nothing is flat or parallel, beams balanced crookedly on supports thrust off the vertical. Nails clutch at open seams. The whole structure leans dangerously towards the miraculous. Into this rough frame, someone has squeezed a living space, and even dared to place these eggs in a wire basket. Fragile curves of white hung out over the dark edge of a slanted universe, gathering the light into themselves as if they were the bright, thin walls of faith. So there we go, that is the poem. So here is some context about Imtiaz Dharker, the poet. Remember, relating analysis to context is equal to 1/3 of the marks on the WJEC Eduqas mark scheme. So Imtiaz Dharker is a poet who was originally born in Pakistan, but moved to Scotland when she was less than a year old. Now she lives all over the world, splitting her time mostly between the UK and Mumbai, which is in India. Dharker is alive and writing now, and she uses her multicultural perspective throughout her writing. Throughout her work, Dharker tries to raise awareness of how people live in other cultures. She does this in her poetry, but also in her jobs as a filmmaker and artist. She is particularly interested in how children and women live. And now for some context about the poem's content, the Mumbai slums. Dharker has explained that this poem is about the slums of Mumbai, which is a city in India that is formerly known as Bombay. Millions of people from all across India move to the Mumbai slums, hoping for a better life. It is currently unknown just how many people live in the slums of Mumbai, because there are that many people. Most sources agree that it's around 15 million people though, and considering that most of the slums are less than a square mile each in size, the population density is massive. Asia's largest slum is in Mumbai, and it has limited access to electricity, clean water, food, or opportunities for education. In these areas, therefore, there is tremendous poverty. Lanes are narrow and dirty, and the bathroom facilities are crowded and communal. Huts are small, cramped, and overcrowded, and people often get their drinking water from the sewers. Before we get started annotating the poem, this is your reminder to get 3 highlighters and to set up your own key. You'll need 1 colour for imagery, 1 for language, and 1 for structure. Titles are things that we can analyse, and this poem is no different. So there's my question about this poem's title. Why has the poem been called Living Space and not house or home or something similar? What is the particular effect of the phrase living space? Pause now if you'd like to make your own attempt at answering that question. So when we think of the word home, there's plenty of connotations there. Generally, we associate the word home with warmth and safety and affection and security. By calling these abodes living spaces, these connotations are removed. They are not warm, they are not safe, they are not secure, and you do not feel a sense of affection towards it. Alternatively, rather than reading this as a living space, perhaps it is a space that is alive, a living space. This interpretation could suggest the energy and disorder and hum of the slums, and how so many people are packed in to such a small space. So here's the poem's first stanza. It's a fairly large stanza and certainly larger than most chunks that I cover in a single go when doing a close reading, which means that there's quite a few different questions for us to consider. In fact, there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 different questions. It's quite fitting, I think, that your screen looks a bit cluttered and irregular now. So if you want to give the questions a go yourself first, now's a good time to pause the video. So the first 2 lines of the poem express that there are not enough straight lines, meaning that the slums are wonky and poorly or haphazardly constructed. This has been reflected in the poem's structure, as the use of enjambment prevents the sentence from being expressed over a single straight line. That is the problem is a declarative sentence, which is a fancier way of saying a statement. The lack of emotion in the sentence makes it an observation rather than an enraged criticism. This suggests that the speaker of the poem is unable to do anything about the problem. Either they are too far removed from it, or they are too entrenched within it. Something interesting is happening in the phrase beams balance, because it uses both alliteration and enjambment, which has an interesting effect on the connectedness of the phrase. Alliteration brings the phrase closer together. It makes it sonically tighter. Enjambment, though, does the opposite and puts space between the words in the phrase. Combined, this puts an odd tension on the phrase, almost as if it's hanging together by a thread, rather than being strongly unified or completely separate. This tension is similar to that experienced by the structures that make up the slums. They are not strongly connected, nor are they completely distinct from one another. This image always brought up a number of interesting interpretations when I taught this poem, and here are two of my favourites. First is that the structure has been personified, and that it is desperately trying to keep itself together, as its nails, here meaning the metal kind, are grabbing at something to attach themselves to. This suggests precarity and fragility. On the other hand, the nails could actually be the fingernails of the structure's inhabitants. They could be clutching, a verb that suggests desperation, I think. So they could be clutching at the open seams in order to repair the space that they live in. Again, this interpretation also suggests precarity and fragility. The line discusses the irregularity of the structure of the slums, which the line mirrors by being noticeably longer than the rest of the stanza. It's not always useful to talk about how a poem looks on the page, and too many students get drawn into the trap of making often nonsensical comments about the literal shape of the poem. But in this case, since this is a poem that uses enjambment so freely, the jutting out of the line, or the word dangerously to be more specific, seems to be purposeful. Miraculous could have two meanings. First, it could suggest that the slum still existing, given its precarious structure, is a miracle. Or secondly, it could suggest that the people living in the slums are leaning towards the miraculous, suggesting that they are yearning for, praying for, a better future. Using context, we do know that many people choose to move to the slums, moving away from rural areas and closer to Mumbai and its opportunities. In the top right box, I've not identified every single word or phrase that helps to create the semantic field of precarity, nor have I highlighted them on the poem, because that's your job. However, this semantic field certainly emphasizes how fragile slum existence, meaning both the existence of the slums, but also the lives of the people who live there, can be. This poem's second stanza is considerably smaller than the first, yet it is still worth analysing in detail. Before I show you the questions for this stanza, it's worth pointing out that the poem's title is on the bottom line. You could, if you wanted to, highlight the phrase living space in your language colour and draw an arrow from it to your annotation of the poem's title. Anyway, aside from that, I have another 1, 2, 3, 4 questions for this stanza. If you want to pause the video and make your own annotations, now's a good time. The image rough frame suggests to me a couple of things. It could suggest a lack of finesse or resources relating to the idea of the slums being places of extreme poverty. Or it could suggest that the frame is not intended to be a frame at all. The person being described in this stanza is virtually identityless, as the noun someone is incredibly vague. This could relate to the idea of the anonymity of the millions of people living in the Mumbai slums. Squeezed, to me, suggests that it would be difficult to get the living space inside of the rough frame, which implies that it does not or should not belong there. This also highlights the resourcefulness of the people living in those slums. They are finding space wherever they can and are using it to their advantage. This stanza is about squeezing something significant into a small space. The stanza itself is small and has been squeezed between two much larger stanzas. Dharker has, once again, ensured that the shape of her poem reflects the content it is discussing. This stanza also acts in a similar way to a volta. The topic of the poem has shifted slightly, as it has zoomed in from a large overview of the slums generally, and is now starting to focus on an individual space. And here is the poem's final stanza. Again, it is quite rich from an analytical viewpoint, and so we have a few different questions to consider. In fact, there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 questions. I feel that this stanza is particularly image rich, and it's one that I've found that students generally get quite a bit out of. So how about you pause the video and see what answers to the questions you can come up with, and then share them down in the comment section below. Right, so first of all, we see that somebody has dared to place eggs in a wire basket in their living space. Dared is an interesting verb choice, as it suggests that someone is rebelling or going against someone or something's control. This rebellion, I argue, is against the poor living conditions, which suggests that the people hope for and aspire towards something better. On the other hand, it could also suggest that they won't let their living conditions get them down, and that they will not be controlled or crushed by them. Eggs are brilliant symbolically, and also provide a wonderfully clear image. More relevantly to this analysis, eggs can symbolize fragility or new life, or perhaps even both of those at the same time. An egg is very easy to break and is irreparable once broken. Yet it lives a precarious existence, and it survives, just about, unless disturbed. This is just like the Mumbai slums, which are also delicate and precarious, but still carry on existing. Alternatively, an egg can also be a symbol of new life. As I'm sure you know, an array of baby animals can come from eggs, and eggs can also be used as a source of sustenance for larger animals, including people. Here, an egg can be used to symbolize the lives of the people who live in the slums. They've gone there for the opportunity of a better life, but the possibility of that future is quite delicate. The rhyme between white and light is one of the few examples of end rhyme that we get in this poem. Thinking about this rhyme, both white and light have connotations of hope. Perhaps the language of this stanza is creating a slightly more positive tone. A slanted universe is another fantastic image in this poem. At a more straightforward level, it could just be referring to the slums. They are massive and are their inhabitants' entire worlds, just like the universe. But they are also slanted due to their haphazard construction. On the other hand, this image could be seen as an attack on the contemporary world. Dharker might be asserting that the universe is wonky or wrong as it's full of inequality and poverty. The image, bright, thin walls of faith, reinforces the idea of the fragility of the existence of the people that live in the slums. I mean this in a number of ways. The slums are not structurally sound and could collapse at any moment. The people live a fragile existence due to the immense amount of poverty that they live in, and also their faith may be fragile. They move to the slums in the belief that it will get them closer to a better life, but how long will that last if they continue to live in those slums? Faith is significant as it adds an almost religious tone to the poem, which is already seen in Miraculous at the end of the first stanza. This suggests, at the very end of the poem, that it is the people's faith that keeps them going. It is their faith that allows them to continue to survive in poor conditions. And that is the whole poem analysed in depth. Now we're going to consider the 3 M's of the poem. And if that means nothing to you, I recommend that you have a quick look at the second video in this series, which is part 2 of my analysis for Simon Armitage's poem, The Manhunt. A link for that is appearing in the top right corner of your screen about now. And there's my summary of the poem's meaning. There's even a little bit of context in there with the reference to it being Mumbai specifically. And there's my summary of the poem's mood or tone. Do you think it's right for me to say that it's moved from critical to hopeful? And finally, that's what I'm suggesting might be Dharker's motivation for writing this poem. I've said that she is highlighting the poor living conditions experienced by the anonymous millions living in the Mumbai slums. I've also written that she's used this poem to acknowledge their existence and to raise awareness of their plights. What do you think? Have I totally got that wrong? If you think that, let me know why down in the comments section. Here we have a theme table. Again, I've explained this in my second video for this series. Again, that's the one for Simon Armitage's The Manhunt, my part 2 of the analysis of that. In short though, I think you'll find it really useful to produce a large table for these themes with a row for each of the 18 anthology poems. If I was filling out this grid for this poem, this is what I might have done. So I've ticked the power box, as I believe that this poem could be said to be about the powerlessness of the people living in the slums. I don't really see this poem as being about nature particularly, nor love, nor war, nor time, but I definitely think it's about place. It's about how people live because of, or in spite of, the conditions that they are placed in. Speaking of people, this poem is also related to the theme of man, but I don't really see it as being a poem about death or religion, really, although I could be convinced otherwise. Certainly, the idea of faith appears quite a few times in this poem, but I don't know if it happens enough or substantially enough for this to be considered a religion poem. I think you might struggle to write a whole essay about religion in this poem, for instance, but if you can find 3, 4 or 5 quotations that might back you up, then you could. And please, If you think you've got 5 quotations that relate to religion in this poem, tell me in the comments section. I would love to hear your ideas, honestly. So, in all, those are my thoughts about the themes that could apply to this poem. But what do you think? Let me know how you would fill out this grid in the comments section below. For this video's revision exercise, I think a bit of flashcard making might be useful. So on one side of your flashcard, I recommend writing some analysis, but writing it so that it is posed as a question. And then on the other side, you would write the quotation that matches up with the analysis. Of course, you could also complete this activity for any of the other anthology poems, or really any of the other literature texts more generally. There we go. That is living space done. I'd really appreciate it if you could drop a like on this video, especially if it's helped you out. Don't forget that I'm in the process of making videos for all of the anthology poems, so subscribe to my channel and turn on that notification bell and you won't miss a single thing. As I've mentioned quite a few times in this video, please do use the comments section. Feel free to ask me questions about the poem or to add your own bits of analysis. I really do hope that you have a fantastic day. And if you're in the middle of revision hell, please remember to take short, frequent breaks, because a burned out student is not a happy or successful student. So what might those eggs in a wire basket symbolise? Well, the wire basket is a structure that could be seen as flimsy and full of holes, and yet it still contains all those eggs. It still keeps them all in place. And those eggs, despite being immensely fragile and easily broken, the eggs are also an image of hope and new life and a better future.